Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Happiness, it's something that all of us reach out for and hope that we can grab. And in this day and age of technology, we try to do so with a minimal amount of effort. At least that's what I believe anyway. Anybody who's commuted on public transportation can see that most people are sitting down and they're looking down at the palms, and in those palms are definitely cell phones. On those cell phones, iPods, whatever the case may be, we reach out and touch that button to see if we can ignite something that stirs within us that creates at least that moment of joy to take us out of our present situation. On our program today, we're joined by a world's leading expert on happiness, and he decides that we're going to see how we're going to get here. Spent more than 40 years studying the most practical and powerful methods for achieving a state of personal life satisfaction and happiness. He's done personal experiments with vast number of apps, gadgets, tools, and supplements seeking the very best happiness hacks. We're going to discover today in his book, The Technology of Joy, the 101 best apps, gadgets, tools, and supplements for feeling more delight in our lives. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Jonathan Robinson.
Well,
Jonathan, thank you for being on the program today. I'm
excited to be here.
Well, anybody who's been on Oprah Winfrey about as many times as she has to be pretty happy about something. Now, tell us how you decided to go this direction with your life. 40 years discovering happiness. It's really interesting that all of us try to seek the possibility that we could be happy all the time. Is this possible?
Well, I don't think we need to be happy all the time. I think we just need to not get stuck in negative emotions so much, and that we, kind of like kids. Kids don't spend a lot of time stuck in negative emotions, and they experience more joy. So I think that's certainly possible because that's kind of how we were born.
So now let's talk about how you approach this whole thing so people can actually relate it to their lives in your book, The Technology of Joy.
Well, what I've looked at is that most people, after they're about 10 years old, don't have that much joy or feelings of deep love or gratitude in their life. And I've wondered, how can people get there? Well, I'm a pretty lazy person, so I was always looking for methods that would take under 2 minutes a day of effort that could really lead to profound levels of joy and depth and peace. And my searches over the last 40 years have shown that there are some methods that work incredibly well that most people don't know about because they're either new or there's no corporation able to advertise it because they don't cost much.
Well, that certainly makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, I was motivated by pain. As a teenager, I was very depressed and suicidal, and I thought, hopefully there's a better way. And, in this culture, or the American culture that we're brought up in, we're taught that the way to be happy is to try to control all the people and events in our life to be exactly the way we want. That's why money's so important. But that's a very tiresome activity, and it doesn't work that well. Depression is 500% higher than it was just 50 years ago. So I was looking at, can technology help us in this way? And to this point, technology has mostly created what I call WMDs, which are widgets of mass distraction.
I like that one. You certainly don't hear the presidential administrations talking about that, do you? But
no.
Yet it's permeated. It's all around us.
It is. And people look at their smartphones 140 times a day. The average American watches over 4 hours of TV a day. So I wondered, can we actually use the new technologies, such as new supplements or brain stimulators or various gadgets that have come out recently to tap into more joy? And the answer is definitely yes. In fact, there's so many of these things coming out, I decided to write The Technology of Joy because most people don't know where to start. So I gave a review of my 101 favorite methods, and I find that if people try a few of these, they, usually their world is pretty rocked because they find something that works really well in under 2 minutes a day.
You know, it's interesting, Jonathan. I have a friend of mine who's been in the restaurant industry for several years. Now, we're talking many years, so he's really seen quite a bit. And he says it really astounds him as he works the front of the house and he takes care of tables of people that sit there and they go out to enjoy a dinner. And he said the one thing that really astounds him sometimes is that you see couples that'll come in and they're both sitting there at the table and they're both looking at their cell phones.
Yeah.
And there's no communication between the two of them. And it was funny because as I was reading your book, there was a particular app called the Ice Break. And what was funny to me when I was reading that is we're getting to a state that people seem to have forgotten what it was like to sit down face to face and be able to comfortably talk to each other. You know, and you think, is technology really helping us or is it hindering us from these things that became so natural, that are very natural for us to do?
Well, I think technology has hindered us. Not many people, when you meet them, say, God, my life is so fantastic. I have so much love and joy and bliss in my life, I barely know what to do with myself. You know, that when was the last time you met somebody like that? They were probably under the age of 5. So, you know, technology has been a distraction, but there are these new technologies, for example, that app that can help people to connect more deeply. Or there's apps that help people to feel more peace. They give guided meditations. Or there's supplements that people can take. I take a supplement now that, I don't know if you're familiar with the drug ecstasy. Are you familiar with that drug?
Yeah, I remember hearing about that back in the 90s.
Yeah. Well, it gives you a feeling of love, but it's very bad for you. It's very hard on your body. My master's thesis was on the therapeutic effects of ecstasy. Well, I didn't think it was a good idea to take the drug because it's difficult on your body, but there's now a supplement that I take that mimics the effect. It costs less, and it's actually good for you, and it just leads to this feeling of ecstasy, which is pretty amazing. And when people try this stuff, they go, God, you know, I've been missing out my whole life because this stuff is pretty powerful and pretty good.
So you're saying there's a supplement out there that can do that very thing?
Well, I would say it does that for me,
mm-hmm.
But different things work for different people. So you have to try a few things, and that's why the book is useful, because I give my review as to what's likely to work for you. So these supplements work really well for me, but I'm pretty sensitive. You know, if I have a cup of coffee, I feel it for about 8 hours. So whereas some people, they drink 5 cups and they don't feel anything. So one of the reasons why it's not more well known is that it does require a little bit of trial and error. And generally, though, I find if people try 3 or 4 supplements or 3 or 4 gadgets, they find one that really rocks their world. And once you have that, you have a friend for life.
Now, you talk about caffeine in your book, and you said that's probably one of the biggest ones, if you want to talk about technology, that a lot of people tend to pursue, that tends to be the thing that creates a lot of happiness, if you will. It may be a little bit more energy, more focus, more aliveness, whatever the case may be. Why is it? What is it about caffeine that does that for us?
Well, it's easy, it's reliable, and it gives you energy. The problem is that if you take any supplement a lot, you build a tolerance to it, and it starts to have less and less effect. You know, your first slice of pizza tastes great. Your 20th slice of pizza doesn't do anything for you, you know, other than make you sick. So I encourage people to try various supplements. What I do is I have 4 supplements that I take, one every 4 days, and that way I don't build up a tolerance to any of them, and I generally have a lot of energy and feel really good. And some of these supplements are actually really good for you. They're more like super vitamins, so that is a nice benefit. But caffeine, you know, it makes you more productive, it makes you feel energized, and it only takes 5 seconds or 10 seconds to drink a cup of coffee or put a caffeine pill in your mouth.
Now, it was interesting, a couple of years back, Jonathan, we did a segment on happiness, and I think it was called The Science of Happiness. And it was really interesting because there were these two students out of UCLA who embarked on a quest to discover, is happiness one of these states that we can achieve that is consistent and continuous? And they came out and the answer was basically no. But you can elevate your happiness to a level that you're more happy, sort of more long term. In other words, even when things happen in your life that tend to get you down, you can be happy in those moments. And they said one of the most consistent things to have perpetual happiness in is by planning things ahead of yourself. In other words, things to look forward to. That way you're kind of excited about what your future looks like. And I think in this day and age, when we're bombarded by so much information, and technology that leads us to discover what's going on outside of our circle of influence, we realize that what we're actually putting in front of us are things that don't make us so happy. For instance, the economy. It's in the tank, and experts are telling us it may get worse. The news of the day, whatever the case may be, we put that ahead of ourselves. That's something that we get up each day and we look forward to. And you realize, gee whiz, pushing that button, that may give me that immediate gratification when I'm hit that app and playing Candy Crush, for instance. Mm-hmm. But the fact is once I'm done with that moment in time, I'm looking forward to the kind of news that I've enraptured myself with, or the information or the experiences that tell me things don't look so good. So I would imagine just simply shifting that according to these two, that thing that makes you more excited about what's ahead in your future. That would probably be one smart direction for us to go in, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And in the Technology of Joy book, I have a few psychological exercises that science has shown increase happiness more through a psychological thing. Like meditation will increase your happiness level overall. But there's some other things that you can do that have had rather dramatic effect. In fact, it was so dramatic that they had to do these studies over and over again because the researchers couldn't believe how big the results were. For example, there's something in the Technology of Joy book where I talk about 3 good things. And that's an exercise that takes about 2 minutes a day. And they find that if people do that for 2 minutes a day, their happiness increases the same amount as if somebody had their income suddenly doubled or if somebody wins the lottery. That's a pretty big increase. And it only takes 2 minutes a day. It's a very simple exercise. It takes about 5 minutes to describe, though, so I don't think I'll do it here. But, now that we have people studying what actually works and what doesn't, that gives us more choices as to where we want to put our time and energy. Because TV doesn't make us happier, although most people watch 4 hours a day. Money, after you make $70,000 a year, more money doesn't make you happier. So, people trying to make $1 million, that's kind of a waste of time as well. When you're poor, more money does have a big impact. But mostly what makes people happy now is the quality of their relationships and also having things that immediately create a physiological state of feeling really good. That's why certain supplements or brain gadgets or psychological exercises can be incredibly useful, especially if they're really, really easy, because most people are like me, they're pretty lazy.
Yeah, we certainly this day and age really want that drive-through lifestyle, don't we?
Yeah. And we're busy, so, if something takes an hour to do, yoga is a good thing, and I do yoga once a week, but I don't do it every day because it takes an hour. But I do use my Tingler every day because that takes 15 seconds and it feels fantastic. I do take these supplements every day because they last for hours and it only takes me 15 seconds to take those. I do use my brain neuro stimulator every day because that takes only 5 minutes and leads to quite an endorphin rush. So that's why you always have to look for what can you actually do versus, what might be a great thing but no one ever has the time to use it.
Now, there was an app in the book that when I came across that I found that was kind of funny because I was immediately thinking of that movie Demolition Man starring Sylvester Stallone. And for those people that may not be familiar with it, he's a police officer that eventually finds that his methods are a little rough. It's in the future, of course, and so he ends up going into a cryogenic state where they actually sort of imprison him, but he's frozen. So they have to break him out because apparently the criminal that he was chasing down in his time was somehow allowed to be loose, so they needed to bring him out of this state. And so he's brought into this world where they're almost completely, based in technology. They don't even know how to make decisions. It seems like the computers are making them for them. And there's this particular scene that I found really funny where it's like an ATM that you step up to, but it more than disperses money, it also disperses, I guess, a way of looking at things. And here is this gentleman, he's standing in front of this sort of ATM machine, and what he does is he says, I just can't find anything good about myself. He's just standing there in self-loathing in front of this ATM machine, and this ATM machine starts spewing off these positive reinforcements such as, you exude nothing but happy joy thoughts to everybody around you, and this machine's trying to make them feel better,
Yeah.
And there's this app called TalkSpace for $25 a week. Tell us about that one.
Well, what the idea behind TalkSpace is that, most people go to therapists and they take a time out from their life and they go, and it takes a lot of time and it costs a lot. TalkSpace is you get access to a therapist any moment of the day, 24/7, and you can text them and they'll text you back. So it's like, okay, I just had an argument with my wife and this is what's happening, what do I do? So, in that way you can get more of what you need right in the moment. It's like just-in-time therapy. And it can be a great way to have like a helpful coach throughout your day. And it costs $25 a week, so it's not cheap, but one therapy session now can cost $150. So in that way it can be a lot cheaper. There's so many apps and gadgets now that it can be overwhelming. That's why the book could be useful, because if you read about enough of them, you'll say, yeah, that one looks interesting. That would work for me, or that one doesn't. And you don't need many of them to work for you. You just need one or two, and your life is changed. For example, caffeine is just one supplement, but without that supplement, a lot of people, their lives are a lot less enjoyable. Or, you could take other things. A lot of people spend time each day watching TV. Well, if they didn't have a TV, which is a technology, their life would be a lot less enjoyable. So we always, I think, have to invest in new ways of feeling what we really want in life, and in my opinion, that's the depth of love, peace, and gratitude. And the good news and the bad news is that most people don't experience that much of those feelings. I mean, a lot of people go to Disneyland to experience, a real joy, but you have to fly across the country, you have to spend $100 to get in, you have to wait in line for an hour, and you get like 90 seconds of joy. That's not very efficient.
It doesn't seem that way, especially for us people, as you were mentioning earlier, who tend to be lazy.
Yes.
But, would we be any happier being able to go into Disneyland and being able to get on that ride almost immediately?
Well, I don't think that pursuing these external things is really the key. We've been a very focus on money, relationship, Disneyland, all these externals. When all the spiritual leaders in the world have always said that the kingdom of heaven is within, whether the Buddha or Jesus or Muhammad or anybody. But we haven't known good keys to that kingdom. How do you find that peace within? How do you find that joy? We haven't had really efficient keys to that kingdom. But now there are these keys to that kingdom, but you have to try out a few to find the one that works for you. And if you do, you find one that unlocks your heart. So sometimes the description of these keys doesn't sound like much. You're putting this thing on your forehead and it zaps you for 5 minutes. Well, but really it's an experience. And if you have some life is never the same.
But it's really interesting that once we find that particular thing, sometimes we tend to overdo it. We tend to, it's sort of like that song that you might hear at that happenstance moment that really enhances that particular moment. In other words, it becomes that moment, so every time that you hear that song, it will induce that memory, of that elation that you felt when you first heard it, And it was interesting, many years ago I was attending some broadcasting courses at college, and there was sort of a little bit of a debate going on where the teacher just couldn't seem to answer the student's question, because all they were talking about was, how a particular song, they remembered it, for instance, because of the video that was made.
Yeah.
And the instructor was trying to say, as someone who's going to open up the mic and communicate with the audience as they're playing the music, that's something that you really want to kind of find a way to own. In other words, have an experience that you can share over the air that really is very unique. And so it seemed like he wasn't being able to communicate to the students who seemed kind of confused, and I simply jumped in. Maybe it was my age or experience at the time, but I simply said, look, when you watch a video, you're buying into the musician's way they interpret the experience of that song, and so you're locked into that experience. Rather than, let's say that you're sitting at the river with your girlfriend, and that song comes on for the first time, you're going to be able to open up that mic as you play that song to your listening audience and relate an experience that seems very relatable for a lot of people. And the teacher pointed and said, that's exactly what I'm trying to point out. The class was just sitting there looking at me like, I didn't think about that before. But really, who wants to share an experience of a video a band made?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I'm not sure what you're trying to get at there, but what you started with...
the whole idea was behind the song itself is that when we hear that and we experience that elation that I'm talking about, where it really enmeshes with a life experience that you're having, that we try to re-pursue that over and over and over again, hoping to have that same experience, but it becomes very elusive because then you're making a concerted effort to have sort of that endorphin moment that you had that very first time.
Yeah. Well, it runs into the larger question, which is, can any of these things be bad for you or addictive? And the answer is yes, just like coffee can be bad for you or addictive if you use it too much. And, a song that plays over and over again and loses its meaning, that's why it's useful to have a lot of different ways for feeling joy rather than just one or two, because anything that you use too much will tend to have less effect or negative effect. So that's why I think it's important for people to invest a little bit of time and energy in finding new ways of feeling gratitude, love, joy, and that they don't get stuck just doing the same thing over and over again. And a lot of people do, at one time, your first cup of my first cup of coffee was like a drug trip, but your fifth cup of coffee doesn't feel very good, and if you take it every day, it doesn't feel that great. So that's why it's important to always be exploring new ways that work for you and gives you more variety to choose from.
Now, speaking of the drug-induced form of happiness, you were talking about, I believe the title was A Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, and where there was an experiment that was done where people were taking about 1/15 of a normal dose of LSD. Now, let's talk about that for a little bit because, that's one of those things where this day and age you're beginning to see more and more states, for instance, legalizing the commercial sale of marijuana. I mean, here's this drug that was basically put on the don't you use this or you're going to find yourself doing terms in prison situation, to where now you can pretty much walk to virtually every street corner and a half and find yourself, at least in some states, able to purchase this. So, we're drawn to something like this, these ways to induce a different state of mind. Let's talk about that particular experiment and why that was effective.
Well, I don't know where you're broadcasting from, but I live near the Bay Area in San Francisco.
We're just north of you, actually.
Oh, okay, great.
In fact, the Great Northwest, which we know as Portland, Oregon, which for the fans out there, you should know it's the beer capital of the world, so we've got a lot of happiness going on up here.
Right.
Lots of festivals, believe me.
Well, it's this thing called microdosing, where people take very small, very, very small amounts of LSD, and they have a normal day. And I've done this as well. And what the effect is that you're actually more. It's a little bit like caffeine and coffee, where you're a little bit more productive, you're a little bit nicer, you're a little bit more empathetic, and you're a little bit more peaceful. So it's a very popular thing nowadays, and we have to realize that there's not so much good drugs and bad drugs. It all depends on how you take them and how much you take. A little bit, a beer is a fine thing. 20 beers, you could die. So we don't say alcohol is good or bad. It depends on who's doing it and how much they're doing, and the same with a lot of other things. So I wanted to give people possibilities and choices that would help them to experience more aliveness in daily life. And a lot of people in the Bay Area are now doing this microdosing. They say that they're more productive, and they are more peaceful, and they're happier. And the downsides they're not aware of. They don't feel any downsides from doing it.
And it's interesting because it reminds me of a guest that I had back around 2000, I believe it was, and he was talking about the transformative power of crisis. And he says, that sometimes using things such as perhaps alcohol or, let's say, LSD or maybe even marijuana, he says they'll fling you into the castle, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is they fling you out about as fast as they flung you in. Then you start doing more and more of it, and before you know it, you find your physical health deteriorating, and there isn't a whole lot to be happy about that.
That's quite true. That's why you want to especially stay away from addictive substances, and everything has a potential upside and downside, and you always have to weigh the cost. Is this creating more of an upside for me or a downside? Same thing with coffee. Is the upside worth the downside? And what most people don't know is that there are various supplements, not just microdosing LSD, but a lot of new supplements that have very large upsides and seem to have no downside at all. And that they don't know about them is the main downside. I take something called sobuthiamine every day, which is a B1 vitamin that crosses the blood-brain barrier. So it's something that's considered really good for you, and it doesn't seem to have any downside to me. It makes me feel joyous, and it also happens to be good for the body. But there are other things that can actually be either addictive or create a little bit of stress for the body. For example, coffee. It taxes the adrenals. That's why people shouldn't necessarily drink it every day. But for most people, the upside is worth, doing it. And I think that's why I like to put psychological methods and other methods in there as well, so that there's not just one way to feel good. And in fact, in the 90s, I interviewed a lot of those psychological and spiritual leaders on the planet, everybody from the late Mother Teresa to the Dalai Lama. I asked them all for their best method for feeling really good. And what was interesting to me was that by far the number one answer by all these people, there was 40 interviews, was tapping into feelings of gratitude. So that's something that people don't talk about a lot, and they don't know necessarily a method for doing that. Luckily, there are some apps that can help you to do that. But many years ago, I went to India to meet a guru who supposedly had this magical mantra that helped people feel overwhelming gratitude. Well, I'm always into the latest technology, and I figure if he has this great phrase for helping people feel gratitude, I wanted to know what it was. So I fly to India, 18,000 miles away. Have you ever been to India?
No, I haven't.
it's a hard place to get to, and once you're there, it's like 120 degrees, and somewhat polluted and loud, and
the trains and buses are pretty interested because as many people ride on the outside as they do on the inside.
yeah. It's a funny place. Anyway, so I'm riding a rickshaw to this ashram for 4 hours on a bumpy dirt road, and then I get there and I have to wait 4 hours in line to talk to the guru, and I'm jet lagged and worn out. And I finally get a chance to talk to him. I say, Guruji, my friend told me you have this magical mantra for helping people feel gratitude. I know how important that is. Can you please tell me what it is? And he says in his deep Indian accent, yes, my mantra is the most powerful mantra on earth. And he leans in to whisper it into my ear. I'm very excited because I traveled all this way. And he says, whenever possible, repeat the following words. The mantra I give you are the words, thank you.
Thank you. There you go.
I said, that's it? I traveled 20,000 miles to get the word thank you? Are you kidding me? That's it? And he says, no. That's it is the mantra you have been using. That makes you feel like you never have enough. My mantra is thank you, not that's it. That's it will take you nowhere. So I thought he was kidding, or I didn't know, but that was it. And so I said, well, then thank you. And then he looked at me and he said, no, thank you is not the mantra. You must say it many times a day from your heart. So when you eat good food, say thank you. When you see your child or a sunset or your pet, say thank you from your heart many times a day, and soon you will be filled with gratitude. So I was still pissed off, but I figured I would use what he said because I traveled all that way. So as I left the ashram, I get into a taxi. It has air conditioning. So I say, oh, thank you for this air conditioning because it's 120 degrees out. And then I pay him when I get to the hotel. I say, thank you for this money because a lot of people don't have any money. Then I get into my hotel room and I say, thank you for the bottle of water that they put there. That was clean water. And then I get on my computer and there's Wi-Fi in this hotel. Thank you for Wi-Fi. And thank you for Google. All the world's information is available. Then I Skype my wife for free. Thank you that I can talk to my wife on the other side of the planet for free. And I kept doing this, and within half an hour, I had tears of gratitude going down my face because I was now feeling the blessing for all the things that we have in this age. And a little 4-second technique like that, done a bunch of times, can totally shift your attitude. So you never know when a little stupid technique, in this case, can make a huge difference in your life. I mean, we live better than billionaires lived 15 years ago. We have more access to healthcare and communication and information and music and movies, and yet if we don't have some way of tapping into it, we miss out.
What's really interesting, though, what you described there, Jonathan, is the idea of searching outside of yourself for something that may have your inner self feel better, that search for happiness. And I was just reminded as you were sharing your story of a movie called The Razor's Edge. Are you familiar with that one?
Oh, yeah. It's one of my favorite movies.
Starring Bill Murray there. And so you're familiar with that point where Bill Murray runs into this Indian person who's washing his car at a cab. I can't remember what it was exactly, but he's wondering about this enlightenment that all of a sudden he hears about. Here's this World War I veteran, he's stumbling and trying to find his way, with the silver spoon ex-girlfriend, demanding that his life should be better than he's actually running it. He's trying to figure out, what do I do here? And he says, well, you're really missing the point, the Indian person says to him about this idea of enlightenment. He says, you all keep searching for it outside of yourselves. He says, it permeates in everything, and the work you do and the relationships you have, this and that and the other. And so what you're describing, with this particular guru that you went to visit and became disappointed at first with the idea of just saying thank you, is to feel that gratitude inside, that you can be grateful that perhaps this bad situation has happened, but that you were in it. Now, how are you going to deal with it? And are you capable of dealing with it where it becomes a good thing, and to be grateful for that? And how often do we find ourselves when things seem to be going good, or at least, regular, where things aren't so bad, we get comfortable. And all of a sudden we look back at those times when we were digging around for change in the couch so we can go out and get a hamburger, for instance, versus now you've got plenty of money that you can go out and that choice is available almost all the time now. And we look back at those times and realize, I was pretty happy then when it seemed like things were so desperate. That's kind of an interesting paradox, isn't it?
Well, happiness is largely a state of mind, not based on what's happening externally. And here's a one-question IQ test for you. See how you do on this. According to the research, it shows that which of these two groups of people are happier? In Group A are people who a year earlier became paralyzed from the waist down. Group B are people who a year earlier won over $1 million in the lottery. Which of those two groups, according to scientific research, is happier?
I would think the people with paralysis, and this is the only reason I say this, people who win the $1 million or the large lotteries are now infested with way too many choices about what they decide will make them happy. And I think the paralyzed group would be that way because they're just grateful they're alive.
Well, actually, they're both equally happy.
Well, how about that?
It doesn't really matter so much what happens to you in your life. What matters is if you have people that you care about and that you have things that bring you joy. That's why these supplements and gadgets and tools in the Technology of Joy book, I think, are very useful because most people, their ways of tapping into that inner joy are kind of like, it's like using a computer from 1980. Nobody has a computer from 1980, because you update your computer every couple of years because the technology keeps getting much better. In fact, I have an interesting story about that. In 1972, I happened to be in a computer class in my high school, and they had just bought this computer. It was about the size of a refrigerator, and it basically played tic-tac-toe and a couple other games. That's the state of the art in 1972. And there was a guy in this computer class who was older than me named Steve, who was really kind of pushy, and he was very intense. And he and I were always vying for this computer. And I didn't know it at the time, but this person, pushy guy named Steve, ended up being Steve Jobs. We went to the same high school.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, at the time, you don't think this is Steve Jobs. You think this is the pushy jerk Steve who is always trying to get on the computer. Well, the only conversation I ever had with Steve at that time was I'd been in the computer chair, and he was trying to get in the chair at the same time. I said, "What's your problem? Why are you so obsessed with this machine?" And Steve looked at me and said, "Don't you see? This machine is going to change everything. It's going to totally change the world." Well, it was hard to see that this refrigerator-sized thing that played tic-tac-toe was going to change the world, but he was right. And technologies have a way of getting better very quickly. And the technologies of joy that exist now are already pretty good, and some of them are great, but most people don't know about them, and they're going to get a lot better very quickly. And soon, I'd say in 5 years or so, they are going to transform the world because people are going to be very focused on these new ways of feeling really good versus the very inefficient ways that we've used in the past.
I'm reminded, and you're so right, about technologies being able to sort of have that express lane toward improvement because as you were describing that story about the big refrigerator-sized tic-tac-toe machine, I remember in 1974 stepping into a Shakey's Pizza Parlor in Southern California, and lo and behold, for a quarter you could play the first video game, which was Video Pong.
Right.
That was pretty exciting then, but by the time we actually got one of those, I guess, call it the home Video Pong machine into the house was about 1978. And by then, you now had on the horizon things such as space invaders and asteroids, things you're like, now how do I get that? You remember the Intellivision, for instance, and Atari, and which ones had the better graphics. And nowadays, you have like things like World of Warcraft, and big societies built around, this virtual gaming that now you can connect with people worldwide and play in real time and basically create a separate reality. And it's really fascinating how technology has taken us into directions that I don't know that they even thought, foreseen, or intended to happen.
Yeah, and I actually have a chapter in the book about virtual reality and how that's going to also impact how we pursue happiness. And there's some great, I'm a psychotherapist, and there's some great ways of using virtual reality to help people over fears, to help them over depression, and it's going to not just help us experience more joy and gratitude, but also help us get over some of our psychological problems.
Now, there was a piece of technology, an app, if you will, that you had discovered at the 2015 Consumer Electronics Show called Think.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. That seemed kind of interesting because I was thinking, okay, this is something that applies electro energy to your brain or something like that via your smartphone, but give our listeners a little bit more insight about this one. I found that one really kind of wild, actually.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, the Think is a thing that fits on your forehead. It's about a third of the size of your smartphone, and it puts in a very small amount of electricity into your prefrontal cortex. It's safe. It's FDA approved. The Pentagon has been using this for years to keep soldiers alert and to help them learn faster. It actually increases your IQ by about 28% temporarily. But it also has a side effect. There's different types of brainwave effects that they can have. Some is to increase learning, some is to make you more alert, some are to make you more relaxed. And you just connect it through your smartphone, and you put it on for 5 to 10 minutes, and it affects you for a few hours. So it's a very popular device, and becoming the only downside of the device really is that it costs $300. But as you know, technology tends to get cheaper and cheaper, and soon it will be a lot less money and probably even more effective. But it's something I use. It kind of induces a state of meditation without the effort. It increases your endorphin levels, like if you run 10 miles. But this way, all you have to do is move your finger across your smartphone.
Wow, that's just really quite amazing. Now, there was one in here I was curious about known as orgone blankets.
Uh-huh.
Well, now, here's one where we kind of step away from technology and we're using practical things that we might have in our home that might surprise our listeners. Tell us about that.
Well, I have a whole section in the book on things that work that shouldn't work, or we don't know why they work. Or they work through what I call PFM. PFM stands for pure friggin' magic. So orgone blanket is a special blanket you can buy on the web. They're not that much money, and they seem to infuse you with energy. It's kind of like doing Tai Chi or meditation for a while, and you put it on you like a blanket, and it gives you more energy. And there's some theory as to why it works, and there's some research that shows that it does work, but nobody knows for sure what's going on. So those technologies I love because, I'm already in bed sleeping. I don't mind, especially if I'm trying to meditate. It's nice to have this sense of infused energy moving through you by doing absolutely nothing.
You got to love being able to do that for most people, right?
Yeah.
Next thing you know, they'll have the lazy boy that has the blanket infused into the material that you're sitting in.
That's a good idea. I might use that one.
There you go. Now you're going to run off with Steve Jobs, and I'm going to have to say, well, I told that guy that idea, and I couldn't believe he actually went with it. So, now here's one that I find interesting. I remember when my wife and I first met each other. Is she had this philosophy, and it's pretty interesting that when you apply this, that it actually is very effective, and she believes that you should at least develop one new skill every 6 months.
Uh-huh.
Just find something that you think might be interesting, pursue it, and see just how well you can do at that particular skill. Even pursue it to a mastery level if you want to. But I found that was really interesting because you realize, for instance, I remember when I first decided to build a website, there's a company out there that you pay so much money a month. People would say, well, that seems pretty expensive, but what you get is basically nothing short of a college education about building a website that should make you money. That's what the goal is.
Yeah.
So here's all this technology that you can learn online to sit down and build a website by yourself without having any HTML coding experience, none of that. You can just do this. But I remember as I started, I'm going through, the first couple of modules, and I can just feel that tension inside of me saying to myself, this seems so hard. I don't know if I'm ever going to get it. That inside chatter that you tend to have when you pursue something new, especially on your own, that causes you to think, should I continue this or turn it over to somebody else to do for me?
Yeah.
But then I sat there, and as I was feeling that, I said, no, wait a minute. Take a deep breath, and let's take one step at a time, and let's pursue this just as it was saying. Use the tortoise speed, just one step at a time. You can do this. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, as I started discovering, man, I'm actually putting together a website here. It was very exciting, and it gave me something to look for. What am I going to learn tomorrow that I didn't know today?
Yeah.
And as I've seen and experienced myself improving in this particular area of expertise, I realized this is pretty exciting stuff. And then taking it to the next level and sharing it, with someone to be able to say, now this is how you do this and so forth. So now I was teaching something that, months before I would have never fathomed.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty exciting stuff. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Well, when we're young, we really get excited about learning. We're curious. We are always exploring. And I think people are happiest when they're learning new things and exploring and growing. Unfortunately, we live in a dangerous cult called American culture that says that the key to happiness is making more money. Well, I like money. Money's fine. But the key to happiness is not making more money. The key to happiness is growing, learning new things, loving more, tapping into the peace within. And we're not taught how to do that. So you have to learn, you have to put some of your time and energy to doing that. And the first thing you learn is that, some of these things are complicated. So luckily there are technologies that can help you to explore, that can help you to, like the think thing that we were talking about, the neurostimulator. It actually increases your ability to learn rather dramatically. So that's a nice technology. And when people are learning and growing, they feel good because they are really aligning with what I think is our deeper sense of purpose, which is to always be growing.
Now, there was a guest I had on the program, I think it was actually late last year, and it was really interesting what he said because it seemed sort of different from what we were talking about. And he brought up, as we talk about the more natural ways of feeling good, and he says, if you can take or somehow get the right amount of omega-3s, which can be found in fish oil or perhaps take a really good supplement, pharmaceutical-grade supplement that is, he says after about 30 days, anywhere between 30 and 45 days, what you will discover is that you go back to your childlike state of thinking, of brain power. And to me, that kind of astounded me because it wasn't something that you typically hear about omega-3s. What you tend to hear is how it's good for your heart. But I thought, wouldn't that be cool if we can get back to that childlike state, like you were saying earlier, about we're curious, we want to learn, failure, so what? We're going to figure out a way to make it work. And we get so complacent as we become adults because of disappointment that sometimes we actually shortchange ourselves from ever pursuing anything new because we figure, well, this might happen, and why suffer when we don't need to? And then there you go into melancholy.
Yeah. Well, I think you can get back to that state or move in that direction. It may not be omega-3s. I'd say that's different things for different people. Not everybody likes vanilla ice cream. So, but omega-3s are good for you, so why not take some? Then try some of these other supplements, see if they do something for you. Try some of these other brain gadgets or apps and see if they do something. I think our mission, should we decide to accept it, is to find what really makes us feel good, so then from your abundance you can give to other people. When you feel crappy, you're not a very good mate, you're not a very good parent, you're not a very good worker. When you feel great, you tend to be a nicer parent, a nicer partner, a better employee. So I think our first job is to find what works for us, and from our good feelings, we're better able to serve other people.
And it's exciting, too, because if you can get to that level, you begin to feel like you're on top of the world and almost anything is possible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good feeling.
Now, one thing I liked is there was a method I think this could actually work for everybody, especially for people who commute to work in the mornings and find themselves stuck in traffic and blah, blah, blah. And this was something I actually heard from also someone some years ago. And as he states, as you were talking about here, this is on your website, findinghappiness.com. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And you talk about how to find happiness in 1 minute a day. And you actually outline that very thing that, we could be, have a problem at work or somebody who's difficult or argumentative. And there's a question that you ask when you're in the heat of a situation that just doesn't feel so good. Let's talk about that question that we should be asking ourselves for 1 minute a day to move us toward happiness.
Well, on my findinghappiness.com website, I have free audio downloads about various methods, and people can go there and sign up for the free audio downloads. But this method is where you ask yourself a simple question. And the question is, what could potentially be good about this? So you're having an argument, what could potentially be good about this? Well, maybe it inspires you and your mate to talk about your relationship or go to a counselor or figure out how to communicate better. Or maybe it's the wrong person. We often in our past we say, oh yeah, that trauma actually helped me. But in the moment we forget to look at things that way. So that question can at least stop the negativity and can sometimes actually help you to see it in a context where you see what this event might be a potential benefit to you. But there's a lot of techniques like that, both on my website and in books. I like the methods that are so easy that they can be done in 20 seconds or less. And I think once people have these tools or these keys to the kingdom, they have a lot better life. It's much more efficient than trying to convert money into happiness, which is not that convertible. But if you can take the difficult moments in your life and put them in an empowering context, that's good. If you can tap into endorphins easily, that's good. If you can take a supplement and feel joyous for hours, that's pretty amazing. And the good news is most people don't know about this stuff, so when they discover it, it becomes kind of fun and exciting to research it. I did this out of a labor of love because it's fun to always be discovering new things.
Well, I think the other two with that question that you ask, as you change your happiness in 1 minute of a day when you're in a situation that seems maybe overwhelming or not so comfortable, is as you ask that question, what you're inducing the question to me would seem to be, what is the mystery of this moment?
Mm-hmm.
And we get to a point as we get older, especially people in midlife, where we might feel jaded, like, I feel like I've experienced it all, nothing's going to surprise me anymore, what's next? And then we fall into that mundane trance of just the same thing, sort of like Groundhog Day, every day, and there's no mystery, but that question begins to elicit us to start seeing into the mystery. What's this going to bring to me?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the biggest reason that changes the way we feel.
That could be, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anything to bring a little bit more mystery and learning into life is a good thing.
Yeah, a funny story. I remember I was at the supermarket one time, and there were these two young boys, and they had their soda pop and their candy, and they got it up there on the counter. They're getting ready to pay for it, and they're digging around in their pockets trying to find their money. And I told the clerk as they were distracted, I said, here, go ahead and just take it out of this and pay for it, but don't say nothing. And I was just really entertained to be there for the moment. The next thing you know, as they turned, they finally found their money. They went to hand it to the clerk, and the clerk says, no, you guys are good to go. They had no idea. They were standing there just dumbfounded, looking at each other like, but you can imagine that moment. They were not only probably thinking, wow, how did we pull this off, but the story that must have happened afterward.
Right.
Pretty exciting stuff. Now, on your website, findinghappiness.com, what can people find there? You were talking about some downloads and things like that.
Well, of course, they can find the book, The Technology of Joy, or they can put in their email address, and I'll send them free downloads of my favorite and the most well-documented happiness-increasing techniques that take under 2 minutes a day to do. So, and all that's free. The book costs like $12 or $13, but everything else is free. And I like helping people, so they're also able to reach me and ask questions if they want. I've really enjoyed this. Unfortunately, I got to go because I have an appointment, but I really appreciate the great questions.
Well, absolutely, and you've got things to go do, and we're just at the top of the hour here, but finally, just real quick, a gratitude journal. Why is that important?
Well, like the thank you technique I talked about earlier, by counting your blessings and being aware of them, it helps you to feel more gratitude. And gratitude is really what we're after a lot of the time. You're trying to get everything to be the way you want, so you'll eventually feel like you have enough and can be grateful. But you can tap into gratitude right away because most people here listening are breathing okay. They have food that they like. They have a bathroom that's that works. They have hopefully people that they care about. They have access to the internet. They have access to radio. They have access to TV. There's a lot of great technologies out there that are free or easy, and by writing about them real briefly, it helps you to feel better.
Absolutely. Jonathan, and wrapping it up, I'm remembering the movie G.I. Jane where the sergeants say, pain is your friend, and the reason is because pain lets you know that you're still alive.
Right,
That's something to be grateful about. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. Again, the book is The Technology of Joy. Our guest today, Jonathan Robinson. You can find out more by going to his website, which is findinghappiness.com. You can also discover more by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We encourage you to subscribe for our free weekly e-newsletter to stay up to date on what we're up to and what's coming up on the program. You can also follow us on Twitter at Beyond50Radio as well as Facebook. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.